Good afternoon. It is my honor today to introduce Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Speaker Pelosi has had an illustrious career in the House of Representatives. She's a speaker in her third term. In 2007, she created history as the first woman speaker in the House. Speaker Pelosi has been a great friend of India. In 2008, she championed the US-India Nuclear Pact. There were many who were against it, but it was a leader like Speaker Pelosi who saw the potential that the relationship had and championed it. Over the last decade, we've had many more agreements, and our ties have come much closer. Speaker Pelosi has helped us, as people, come closer in our commitment to democracy, to principles like free trade and entrepreneurship. Madam Speaker, it is these principles that have enabled companies like Mahindra to invest a lot more in the US. We look at ourselves as American companies, helping create jobs and helping grow economies in small towns across America. I think I speak for all of us in acknowledging that it is leaders like Speaker Pelosi who are at the helm today at a historic time where we can take the India-US relationship to the next level. With that, I'd like to welcome Madam Speaker and John Chambers for the next talk.
Madam Speaker, it's an honor to have the chance to interview today and be the moderator. It's rare in life when you get to interview somebody that you really care about, that's been one of the greatest leaders of our country, and somebody that you know also is going to share a lot of wisdom and healthy give and take. Perhaps Shimon Peres was somebody else who immediately comes to mind in that category.
That's so lovely, thank you.
You've accomplished so much, and one of the easiest ways, maybe other than your 9 grandchildren, I only have 2, I'm trying to catch up, is to ask a leader, out of all the things that you've been fortunate enough to accomplish in life, other than your family, what has been the one that meant the most to you as a leader?
Well, first let me thank you, John, for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Dr. Shah, for your very generous words of introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. Anytime I have any association with India, especially in the context of the value of our relationship, it's a joy to me. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm a mom. That's my why. You know, in other words, as people always say, why is somebody running for president? Say, show your why. Why are you here? My why was the 1 in 5 children in America who lives in poverty. I have 5 children, my husband and I have 5 children, and the idea that these children were going to sleep across America hungry and in poverty was just intolerable. I couldn't tolerate that, so that's why I went from kitchen to Congress, housewife to House Speaker. But I must say, as House Speaker then, now my source of greatest legislative pride is the Affordable Care Act, to bring health care to millions more Americans and improve the quality of care, no pre-existing condition, barriers of the rest. That to me was really like a pillar of Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. And so one of the reasons I stayed in Congress was to preserve the Affordable Care Act, and that continues, because it's about not just health care, it's about the good health of America, and it's about fiscal soundness for families. It's really a financial challenge. We're all just one phone call away from an accident, a diagnosis, or whatever that can change not only the quality of your health, but also your financial survival as well. So for me, that working with President Obama on that was my major official accomplishment.
You've done it so many times. If it's all right, I thought we'd start in the U.S. talk about the U.S. for a while, then go around the world, both hot spots and trouble spots, then end up in India. And you've been very close to India for many years, but I'd like to save most of that for the last third of the conversation, if it'd be all right. In the U.S., could you share with the group your priorities over the last 7 months since regaining the gavel? And congratulations again. We're so proud of you in California, and the third most powerful person in our country, and our top female leader.
Thank you.
But your priorities over the last 7 months, and then obviously what are the priorities for the next 5 years?
Well, I understand the format that you have laid out. I can't wait to talk about India as we get toward the last 30% of our, whatever it is.
We'll go wherever you want.
But let me just take the Speaker's prerogative to thank John Chambers for his tremendous leadership. He has been such a force in our country, and such an advocate, leader, champion for the U.S.-India relationship. I don't think there's ever been a time that I've seen him in the last, I don't know how many years, that he hasn't said, let me tell you what's happening, what's happening. And so it gave us sort of a roadmap for when we did go to India, that we knew what to appreciate more fully. He's written a book, Connecting the Dots. So let me promote his book. It's called Connecting the Dots. And it's, I can't wait to read it on my way home to California tomorrow. But in Connecting the Dots, I'm reminded that one of the first things he said when I barely knew him, he came to my office and he just said, I want to know what you are doing. Okay, so you're asking my priorities. I want to know, what are your priorities? What is your deadline? What are your milestones along the way? You remember this?
Oh, I do.
So I became just advocate of the approach of connecting the dots by way of John Chambers. So thank you, John Chambers, for this. Okay, so we ran on a For the People agenda. For the people, lower health care cost, bigger paychecks, cleaner government. And our agenda in the first 6 months of the Congress, which just ended when we left for the 4th of July district work period, we accomplished many of the past legislation in the House to achieve those goals. And the issue of health care is one where, you see all these debates about the Congress. Our goal is for all Americans to have access to quality, affordable health care. Medicare for all, this, that, and the other thing. Put it all on the table, see what works that is affordable. That's our bill. The ACA is the Affordable Care Act. Affordable. It wasn't a very jazzy name, but it was very descriptive for what it was. So that we've had many pieces of legislation that are in furtherance of lowering cost of prescription drugs, lowering premiums, et cetera, and increasing quality. We are trying, and this may be a further question, we are trying to work in a bipartisan way to do that with the president. I know he wants to lower the cost of prescription drugs, and so we think that's a place that we have been working to that end. We also think we can work together with the president on building the infrastructure of America. This is very important, in a green way, It's very important as building the infrastructure. I know it's an issue in India as well, every place, but it's about everything. It's about quality of life in terms of clean air, because you are getting people home faster, out of cars, mass transit, whatever it is. So it's a public health issue. It's a commerce issue for sure. Product to market, as we just discussed with the grain industry representative here. So it's a commercial issue, it's a public health issue, it's a climate change issue that relates to public health, but it's about jobs, increasing paychecks as we do so. And it is a quality of life in terms of getting just people. If it takes you 45 minutes to go pick up your child at school, and it should take 15, but the infrastructure prevents that from happening, this is, it relates directly. So we think that the American people will be well disposed to something that affects their lives very directly, their jobs in a positive way, and to do so in a green way. But in addition to, and then clean government, we passed H.R. 1, which is our first bill. I'm not sure the president's interested in this bill, but we are interested in it, and the people of our country are, is to lower the role of big dark money in politics, increase the role of the grassroots, pass the Voting Rights Act, a bill that we just Save Our Elections Act to have the security for our electoral system in place. So they were the three, but now associated with them were issues that related to what the public overwhelmingly in a bipartisan way supports. Gun violence prevention. 80–90% of the American people support common sense background checks, and we passed that legislation. Protect the Dreamers, the Dream and Promise Act, Dreamers and temporary protection legislation. Issues that relate to net neutrality. We passed a net neutrality bill overwhelmingly. We're very, very proud of that. Something called the Equality Act, which is, opens the civil rights bill to inject protections for the LGBTQ community. There's still discrimination, believe it or not, in the workplace and across the board, so we put that into the civil rights bill, and we passed that in the House. None of this has been passed in the Senate yet, but we do think that while, just don't tell anybody I said this, but that Mitch McConnell has said, I'm the Grim Reaper, all your bills are dead in the cemetery of the Senate. Well, we have news for him. While that may be how he likes to describe himself, the public is very interested in these issues. They're very popular, and we are, as President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. And so we're depending on public sentiment and the outside mobilization, the drumbeat across America for the safety of our children and the equality and fairness in our country. And when we were doing net neutrality, I think this may sound strange to you, but to us it was strange and remarkable. About 5,000 people tuned into the hearing. I mean, 5 million people. That
Yes.
never happens.
Yes.
I mean, like, we always think nobody's watching what we're doing, but 5 million people on net neutrality. But those are some of the issues that are in like our top 10. Climate change action now, that is an important part of that agenda as well.
A tough, complex question, but given your background in Silicon Valley, many people, I think at times, don't realize how well you understand small business, how effective you've always been about focusing on job creation. And over a decade ago, you were and brought the technology industry in for your Democratic team about bringing innovation back to American startups. Right now, the majority of our startups and job creation, unfortunately, is in the Silicon Valley and New York and Texas. How do we bring this across the rest of America, and what can we do to become a startup nation again? And your thoughts about how we make it easier to do business. For the benefit of the people in the room, every time the tech industry had brought an issue on startups and technology to the speaker, or when you were a leader as well, she always not only gave us a fair hearing, she almost all the time was with us. So you get this. And all jobs will be from startups in small business. Large companies are actually, unfortunately, going to probably shed jobs because of digitization and artificial intelligence. Your thoughts on how do we get every state to be a startup state? How do we make it the best place in the world for startups to grow? How do we need to accomplish that?
Well, I appreciate your comments. When we did, before we had the majority the first time, around 2005, 2006, we called upon John and others in Silicon Valley, in the academic world, in the workforce, to tell us if we had an innovation agenda, what would be the particulars that our priorities that we should prioritize, to use the word again, but to showcase in all of it. So John was very helpful with us with that. You and John Doerr were part of all of that. And it was about education, but to get to the small business part, when I became speaker, we planted a flag for small business. Just planted a flag. It is a priority for us in how we do other aspects of our work. And I believe that maybe apart from getting married, starting a small business is probably the most optimistic thing that you can do. Right? It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. And so we like to see big business give mentoring and experience to those who might leave and start their own business. But entrepreneurship, taking risks, has to be recognized as the biggest job creator and capital formation instrument that we have. When I'd say 200 members out right before we had the majority, 200 members out to say, in this next week or so, 2-weekend period, I want you to meet with either a big gathering of small businesses or a round table discussion, or just go door to door in your neighborhoods and bring back what small business people say they need. And by and large, they need access to capital. You know that. That's important. They need a trained workforce. Very important. That would be one of their priorities. And they need customers. And so while there may be other aspects of what they put forth, those were the predominant things. And when we talk about customers, we want to increase the purchasing power of all Americans so that that stimulates the growth that our country has to have springing from small business. But interesting, in our country, the fastest growing element of small businesses are minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses as well. The outstanding manifestation of it, of course, is the Indo-American community that we see firsthand in Silicon Valley. Entrepreneurship, very successful, very strategic, and really a blessing to our economy in California and to our nation. Usually, when you say how to have it go to other parts of the country, usually, but you know better, you can kind of, my observation of it is traveling the country all the time is that it usually is helpful to have a center of excellence, a university or more than one university to be associated with that is the intellect, can be the intellectual resource that attracts people. So that institution would attract capital because it's an institution of higher learning. Capital attracts talent. Capital and talents, facilities, more capital, more talent, more facilities, and then the things that spring from that in terms of small business development. But then there are people just making chocolate truffles and going on the internet and growing businesses quite a remarkable way.
I know we're going to talk about India in a few minutes, but Prime Minister Modi has the same challenge. He has to generate 1.2 million jobs a month. The large companies will be shedding jobs, and he's got to bring it across 29 states where the average state is 50 million people. But with your permission, if we could move to the global stage now, or is there anything else you would like to touch base on in the U.S. before we move on?
No. Well, I would just say this. When we talk about any of these issues, and veterans own businesses to have demonstrate their leadership skills and their fellowship skills that they learned in the military for small business and the rest, it's an issue that we really think we can deal with in a unifying way. What I mentioned to you earlier about our priorities were priorities where there was broad support in the public, maybe not necessarily in the Congress or the Grim Reaper, but broad support in the public, because we believe, as our founders, they gave us a guidance. They said, e pluribus unum, from many one. So as we want to be very open and transparent in what we do, we want to strive to be as bipartisan as possible in how we do it. and to do it remembering what our founders said. They certainly had their differences of opinion, they certainly fought, but they reminded us at the end of the day, we are one country. And that's an attitude that I think manifests itself in the small business arena, because we can all come together and find our common ground to promote small business in our country, which is good for our economy.
When you think about the world, there's so many challenges and hotspots, and I came out of Wang Laboratories and a huge backer of China, and yet the last decade it's been a very tough relationship with China. Your thoughts on China, what are we doing right, what do we need to do differently, and the relationship that we should have with that country?
When we were little children in America, that would be many years ago for me, we were told at the beach, if you dug a hole deep enough, you would reach China. So we always had this attitude that it was right there on the other side of the world, and it was. It is a complicated relationship, and if you look to China, you'll see anything, you can make any case you want. You can talk about a growing middle class and a growing economy and all these things. But it's also a very, very repressive place. 3 million Uyghurs in education camps, what they're doing in Hong Kong to diminish democracy there, Tibet diminishing the culture, the language, the religion of Tibet. So I've had a 30-year fight with China since Tiananmen Square on human rights, lack of market access, and the proliferation of some weapons of mass destruction that they were engaged in. Having said that, we fought so long, we've sort of have relationship. So we do work together on climate, because it is what, in spite of the fact that they have tried to do many things to reduce pollution, because it's a political problem as well as a health problem in China, they still are such a big emitter, as we are in the United States. So that is a place where they have really taken giant steps to reduce the carbon emissions that they have. So that's a place where, now on trade, because that's the subject at hand, when I first started fighting with China 30 years ago, well, let's say 29, because it was within the year after Tiananmen Square, the trade deficit with China was $5 billion a year. I thought, $5 billion. We're going to free the prisoners of Tiananmen Square. We're going to get market access. They're going to stop pirating our intellectual property, and we're going to stop them from selling missile technology and other technologies to rogue countries, because they'll never want to give up that $5 billion. I could win every vote in the House and in the Senate on my assault on the most favored nation, but I couldn't override president's veto, whether it was a Republican president or a Democratic president. They just all went with it. You're wrong. Just stick with the program. It's all going to work out. Now the trade deficit with China is more than $5 billion a week. We decided to ride the dragon. They'll decide when we get off, and it's a huge trade deficit with China. What are we doing right? One of the things that I would have preferred the president to do, because he said, I'm doing China. I said, well, I've been doing China for 30 years. One of the things that I thought was a missed opportunity, let me just say there may be other judgments, but I thought was a missed opportunity, was in the beginning, China used our money and bought things in the EU and other parts of the world. So they were making friends strategically, geopolitically, as well as developing these trade routes, until they said with the EU, now that you're riding the dragon, we're going to reverse it. And so now the EU has a trade deficit. They had a trade surplus in the beginning, that was the come on. Now they have a trade deficit. So the thing would have been to merge with the EU and say, here is a gigantic market, the US and the EU, and we have had enough of your enormous trade deficits with both of us, so we're going to use our joint leverage in this negotiation. But instead, the president placed tariffs on the EU, And that was not, shall we say, viewed as a friendly gesture. And so it kind of divided us, and I'm sure the Chinese were very amused by that. But the Chinese, just to, bottom line is, the Chinese do not have, shall we say, a commitment to enforcement. So when the president was having the agreement in good faith, and it looked great, he kept saying, where do you see it, where do you see it, where do you see it? And then the Chinese walked away because it was the moment of truth. How do you enforce this? I've had, I won't say my equivalent, but the chairman of the Chinese People's Congress, the second most powerful person in China. It's the president, and then that president, the chairman of the Chinese People's Congress, and then the prime minister is third. In my own office, where I reciprocated the hospitality they extended to us, not quite as many courses, but nonetheless. In my office, and I said, you know, I was so prepared just to happily welcome you, but today you're dumping rubber in our mouth. You're violating the WTO in terms of dumping. And he and the chairs of committees from the Congress that he brought with him just blatantly said, when we joined the WTO, they told us we did not have to obey those regulations. So it's a problem.
It is.
It's a problem in terms of enforcement. But again, it's a big country. We have to have a relationship. Of course, India as the largest democracy in the world, the United States as the oldest democracy in the world, have a much more natural shared values and relationship.
Well, maybe let's jump to India, and I'll come back to the world issues. You recognized before most of your counterparts the opportunity for the U.S. and India to work together. Mm-hmm. And you've always had that in your heart. We've talked about it forever, well before I got involved with the council and the forum. How did you come to that conclusion, and what perhaps did you see that others did not see in terms of our opportunities to work together?
Well, I was just lucky. More on the subject than you ever want to know. This is not useful knowledge, just to put it in context. You can.
Now, when she does that, she is a very, very smart woman. So when she does that, we're about to get a lesson on something pretty important.
I'll tell you a story. When I was a little girl, I went to school one day, Catholic school, and I went in, I had a hat on, and the nun said to me, "Who do you think you are, Mahatma Gandhi?" I have no idea. I'm a little girl. I'm Mahatma Gandhi, what's that? So I went to the library. Used to go to the library every day. I went to the library, and already then in the 50s, they had books on Mahatma Gandhi for children. So because this nun said that, I don't know if she meant it as a compliment or she didn't even know Mahatma Gandhi was herself. And so I became completely worshiping at the shrine of Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, when I went to college, in my class, I got every book about Mahatma Gandhi. I just read everything I could on Indian Mahatma Gandhi. I had an insatiable appetite for just learning more and more and more. And one day, this young woman came up to me in a sari, who was my classmate, and she said, "I see that you have taken out all the books on Gandhi. My father is the Pakistani ambassador to the United States. And I want you to take out the books on Jinnah." Which wasn't much, because there were only two. So there we are. But she knew I was hopeless. In other words, but over time, some of the ambassadors have said to me from India, "We're happy that you're enthusiastic about India, but we don't want to destabilize Pakistan, so curb your enthusiasm." But anyway, that's how it started. But the very idea of that Mahatma Gandhi was the spiritual leader of America's nonviolence movement, that Martin Luther King went there in the 50s and learned about nonviolence. I was just asking them earlier, the ambassador earlier, if he had seen the opera Satyagraha. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. In Sanskrit, Satyagraha means two things. It means nonviolence and insistence on the truth. And that was exactly what Martin Luther King did, nonviolently insisting on the truth. So the gift, the spiritual gift that India has given to the United States is really one of the strong ties that we have in our shared values. Now I understand it's going to be 150 years, could it be, since the birth of Gandhi? And the 90th anniversary of Martin Luther King's birthday, right at the same time, and that will be observed in October. But that connection is I don't know if some of you are aware of how strong that is for us in the United States. And as I've said to Prime Minister Singh, I've said it to Prime Minister Modi, thank you for your hospitality to the Dalai Lama, because, again, shared values about the dignity and worth of people. So that's how, then who knew when I was looking like Mahatma Gandhi that I was going to be a member of Congress and Speaker of the House. So it was, again, with respect, but affection for India.
You've always built...
I told you it wouldn't be useful for other purposes.
Oh, no, it keys into my next question after this. It's perfect. In fact, I'll go to it, because I think very often as we get older, we tend to become very fixed in our ways, and we don't think like a young child. We fail to use our imagination, our innovation is what's possible. And we talked about it earlier as a group that if the US and India truly develop a very true in-depth strategic partnership that is a model for the rest of the world, this could have not just economic, but inclusionary principles, both on gender, geographic. It could change the model for the world. And I know that you've got to, just like your grandkids, you've got to love all the countries we interface to. If you were to say, using our imagination and challenging us in this room, what could this partnership look like 5 years out and 10 years out? And if you were to say, here's what you would like to see it represent, what would it be? We're thinking from almost unlimited capability, the ability of us as young people to visualize and us want to be in that role. How would you write the press release for this if we did it right?
Well, you know better than certainly I do, and maybe many of the people in the room, that in terms of technology, we ain't seen nothing yet. So in terms of the digital initiatives that you have always been preaching and talking about, and what's happening in Europe and is part of what is happening in India as well. We don't know what, even when we were talking about writing, yesterday we had a meeting on how we write the Voting Rights Act so that it withstands the court, something. But recognizing that as you look down the road, demographics, technology changes so much, so you have to have it based on principles. And I think that in one of my conversations with Prime Minister Modi, he said to me, how can we, how was the terminology? The way I understood the question was, how can we have our diaspora be helpful to the world? And it was a beautiful thing.
It is.
Because it's obviously commerce is important because we want to create jobs. Obviously, protecting the environment is very important, essential in that regard, and they have to be related. You can't protect the environment and not protect jobs at the same time. But the intellectual resource that this community has is so tremendous in terms of doctors, for example, so in need, so many places in the world for some philanthropic weighing in as part of the Indian diaspora, important. So if we're looking down the road 5 years, it'd be a shrinking globe. Technology makes it even smaller. One of the things that I think is really going to be important, separate and apart from the US-India relationship, one of the things in order for the world to really thrive that we have to do is to, without being judgmental, is reduce the role of corruption throughout the world. It is a very negative force in many countries that should be developing much better, attracting foreign investment, attracting foreign investment. And quite frankly, foreign investment, and many of you are in the business community, obviously, you're part of their diplomatic corps. Not officially, but you represent free enterprise, democratic principles, and the rest, and you are a listening post. You know what is happening better than, and part of the knowledge that we gain about countries comes from what we learn from you, spread all over the world. So because of the shared values we have between the United States and India, there is an opportunity to lift the value system of the whole world, whether it's about Gandhi and, not directly like that, but just in terms of having shared values and being the oldest and the largest democracy, as I mentioned, being entrepreneurial and showing through education how other countries can be lifted up. So if for 5 years out, I would say we would have done our job well if we created more markets, and creating more markets means educating more people and having them increasing their purchasing power, for lack of a better phrase, but growing the economy of their areas. So I do think that going back to after World War II, there was a spirit of how we collaborate together. How we collaborate, I guess together isn't redundant, how we collaborate for our own country's success, recognizing that lifting others up is part of our own country's success. And this U.S.-India strategic partnership is an initiative that can be really a vital force because you know how to connect the dots. Have an agenda, priorities, timetable, milestones, and 5 years will go by. It'll go by like that. But I do think that central to that next 5 years will be protecting the planet. I think that and that's an economic opportunity, a health opportunity, a values opportunity that could be, the way we talked about energy earlier, the word energy, when you said, Mr. Ambassador, energy, and energy is what? Energy is a national security issue, it is an environmental issue, it is an economic issue, and how we use our resources, including water. We just have to be thinking with much anticipation, and to use a word that John used, imagination. The poet Shelley once wrote, the greatest force for moral good is imagination. That creativity. It's good to be smart, it's good to be creative, but also to put yourself in other people's shoes so that you can make judgments that are respectful, but also uplifting in all of it. So I would say, read John's book.
You are good. When you look at other leaders, and I'm very biased toward Prime Minister Modi, he's, in my opinion, one of the top 3 leaders I've ever met in my life, and I've met every one of them for 35 years. He has characteristics in terms of a vision, a strategy. He's fearless, he moves rapidly, and he outlined a digital agenda strategy for all of India, an inclusion strategy, a startup strategy, an education, a healthcare, an environmental strategy, ecosystem, and defense, and he wove them together. That's what I see from a business perspective. When you've met with him and you've watched what he's done, what do you admire most that he's done? And are there things that we can learn in the U.S.? Because we often think that because we have the strongest economy, we can teach others. I think we have as much to learn from India as India does from us. Your thoughts?
Well, let me say that one of the privileges I had was to go to India with President Obama. And we, with John, we were there in a room of business. It was limited. Remember,
yes.
There were 2 rooms. There's one where we had the business meeting, and then the other bigger room, more like this, where they made their speeches. But it was interesting to hear and these were top corporations in the world who were in the room. And they would say, well, we want to know, the Indian businesses were there were saying, well, we want to know how we can better work to succeed in the US. And the American businesses were saying, we want to learn how we can better succeed in India. They had, shall we say, common observations about obstacles to success in both countries, if I can say it that way. But again, learning, that's why imagination, put yourself in another person's place. But at that time, President Modi, after we had the exchange with Prime Minister Modi, and President Obama with the business community, then we went in the other room for the presentation of the two leaders. And Prime Minister Modi made one of the most fantastic speeches I've ever heard. He spoke in English. It was very inspirational about values and all the things that we talk about, valuing our planet, valuing our people, and valuing the opportunities. It was spectacular. Quite different from speeches I had heard him make on the campaign trail. It was like, you know, have you seen him on the campaign trail? You don't want to run against him. So I would say, with all the things that you said about him that you admire, as an observer, messaging, and as I keep saying to the members, everything is interesting. We have our vision, we have our knowledge, we have our strategy. Message, message, message. And he really is a master of that. If you could have seen him in Silicon Valley, maybe you did.
Yes.
But he was on a stage that was circling, so he was constantly seeing different people all the time, not a note in sight. And he was spectacular. Of course, it was in Hindi, but nonetheless, the place was raging. One of my security people was translating for me, and they did have some translation. He just was spectacular in how he had that audience in the palm of his hand from an emotional standpoint. And then this other speech in Delhi, where he just was calm, spiritual, completely different. It was almost like two different people. And of course, if you've seen him on other occasions, be equally masterful. But it's really a lesson. You can have the best ideas in the world. You can have the best strategic thinking about it. You can know so much. Message, communication. He's really masterful in that regard.
We've just got a couple minutes left, maybe a couple areas to touch on, if I may. Each of us as companies have to reinvent ourselves with tremendous speed. And we used the example today of Amazon, perhaps one of the most advanced technology companies in the world, spending $700 million on their employees to retrain them on technology, announced this morning.
Is that right?
And if this is the top company perhaps in the world using technology, and they realize if they don't change, they'll get left behind and train people, you have to reinvent yourself. For our forum group, we broke away, and Henry Kissinger's a very good friend, but he understood exactly why we made the transition to focus not on a trade group, but a group that could form a strategic partnership that would focus on the economic growth of both countries, the job creation growth of both countries, the startup growth of both countries, and how do we really create a win-win that would include gender and geographic diversity as a core part of that. As we make this transition, at times we tend to think, what President Clinton says, we tend to think of it as business people too much. Mm-hmm. Be candid with us. What do we have to watch out for in terms of how we're trying to transition and go where others maybe have not gone? Mm-hmm. And what mistakes will we make in this path of trying to create a strategic partnership between who I think should be the most tight alliances in the world to the benefit of all of its people? Yeah. Both the positives on that, if you would, Madam Speaker, but also the caveats, because sometimes we can run off a cliff and sometimes we don't know any better. Your candid feedback?
Well, while you were speaking, I was thinking of the advantage that we have in this particular relationship. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about just any relation. I'm just talking about this particular relationship. because America is so blessed with the diaspora from India to our country, now Americans, with the understanding of the culture, the values, and the rest of India, which are shared values with us, but in a very Indian way. And so we have a running start on how we go forward. When you were speaking, I was also thinking of one thing that I say to my members. There's an expression about Paris. The more Paris changes, the more Paris is the same. So you have to change, or else you really are left.
Yes.
Even just to be in place, you must change. And people have to recognize the place that is there for them. And that's what is menacing to people when they say, we want change, we want this. Oh, no, I mean that. They have to see what the place is for them. So as you make your decisions and you have, you think strategically all the time, you have to think of your human resources and how they are trained. As I said earlier about small business, they want a trained workforce, and now Amazon is further doing that. That people have to be oriented with the idea that they are part of the change and the future, and just because you're thinking and anticipating into the future doesn't mean you're leaving them behind. And that's hard because, again, we're talking cost and all the rest of that. But there is a value, and we hear so many people come before us and talk about the value of valuing the work of their employees and investing in their employees so their employees are part of the future. And so that it's not about, I remember when I went to India the first time I went to Bangalore, oh my God, I was so blown away. So fabulous. It was so different from what I was seeing in other places in terms of the growth and the vitality and the young people involved in the rest. And now that seems to have been spread throughout India, throughout the nation. Yeah. So people shouldn't fear that. But I think that assurance that people have that they are part of it. And if they aren't, if they can't be, that they're part of something else that springs from it. So you don't need any guidance from me on how you do what you do, except to say I appreciate what it is that you do. And we work in the public sector. We don't want any more public sector than we need, but we do believe that we need a certain amount of governance. And part of the debate in Congress is how much government, and that's been the debate since the beginning of our country. So how you, this isn't going to sound like a nice word, but how you exploit the public sector, because it could be a force for good.
Yes.
You have to take some responsibility for making sure that decisions are made that have unintended consequences with all the good intentions in the world, because that happens in governance as well. So be part of it. I say to people, know your power. Be part of the governmental initiatives that come along. Not only come along, initiate them. Initiate them. Because the entrepreneurial spirit is where we are now and beyond. In 5 years, who knows? Imagine, think back 5 years, think back 10 years. It's like most ancient history in terms of technology.
Yes.
And the rest. And I'm a big believer in technology, and I believe that it can be tasked to do just about anything. And one of the things I was proud of as speaker the first time was working with Prime Minister Singh on the U.S.-India nuclear agreement. So important, and had to be respectful of India's priorities, A. B, I had to call the Prime Minister and say, you've got to call some of the diaspora in the United States, to call some of the members of Congress. And we had that going on as well. And now we're so thrilled that we have so many more members of Congress, some born in India, some descendant from people born in India. So they're there with a seat at the table, one of them running for president of the United States, as you know. So it is, I guess if I were just to telescope a few words were to be say, recognize the importance of public-private partnerships and your role in shaping the public part of that partnership. And to doing it in a values-based way that is respectful of the role that workers bring to the success of a country. And I do think that we all have to play a role in the alleviation of poverty, the eradication of disease, the preservation of our planet, but also to end corruption, which is rampant in so many places and prevents the economic growth that is needed to be good markets for U.S. and India economic growth to take advantage of, businesses to take advantage of. So anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It is, as I say, a joy for me, hearkening back to my Mahatma Gandhi hat, hearkening forward to October 2nd, I guess, is when the anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, a recognition and appreciation of the impact that India has had and continues to have on the United States of America, and that the shared values that we have to be about lifting up people economically, which seems to be the Prime Minister's agenda. We were proud to welcome him to make a speech, a joint session of Congress. We had some concerns about the treatment of Muslims in India. I have to mention that then and now. But again, with all the respect in the world, I thank you for what you are doing. I love I love the word U.S., of course, and India, but strategic partnership. Those are two really important words. And if you're strategic in partnership, I know you will succeed. Thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking Ms. Jinnah. You are awesome. Awesome.